Schumer blocked that. I want to bring in Sunny Slaughter now. She's a vulnerability expert who has decades of experience in consulting on safety preparedness and crisis management. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate having your insight on our air today. You're a certified law enforcement instructor and consultant for the Department of Homeland Security. And I just first want your reaction when you look at that video of now former police officer Derrick Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. What's your reaction?
I am angered. It is very painful because we all watched a murder happen live on television. This was horrific, and this should never, ever happen. He was not trained to do this. So I don't want people to get confused about training and what an individual did when they committed a crime. I'm horrified as he called out his mother, who is deceased. This should never happen to anyone.
These protests, obviously in response to what we saw on video, but also other injustices in our society. Can you explain the larger issues in our society that protesters are trying to shine a light on right now?
Yes, there's a pervasive culture of racial bias and animus and discriminatory practices against people of color and particularly Black people. We are talking about the intersection of homelessness and poverty and wage disparity and health disparities. This these protests started because people are tired when it came to the murder, senseless murder that we all watched regarding George Floyd, but the larger picture of what is happening, the larger protests and the larger animus and anger and pain that people are expressing has to do with long-term and generational systemic and institutional bias and criticism and disparities that impact people, and we are human. Black people should not be subjected to this type of torture and mayhem regularly. Other minorities, Latino brothers and sisters, no one should have to suffer this way. So this is really a march and protest about intersectional injustice that continues to happen. It is pervasive. It has been allowed to continue. There are policies, practices, and behaviors that have been ignored, and people are tired. And if you notice, the crowd is just not those African American descent Black people. This is everyone.
It really is. I just outside my apartment here over the weekend, I saw people of all different backgrounds, all different ages participating, standing up, shining a light on this. I do want to talk about policing. What about policing needs to change? What reforms do you want to see implemented?
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about this a lot, and thank you for asking me that very important question, is that we must have reforms regarding criminal behavior from law enforcement. And notice I said criminal behavior. The badge and the uniform come with privileges that have just really gotten out of control, and we have to change that. And there are some things that I would like to say need to be taken into consideration. We need a citizens review board of these criminal behaviors and acts. They don't have to rise to the level of murder, because long before there's a murder, there are other things that happen. And individuals charged with monitoring the practices, policies, and behavior of law enforcement and without a political lens is really important. Then we also need to understand the difference between what law enforcement is being trained to do and what they're actually doing. And we can't have law enforcement officers who are not willing to come forward and know that they won't have repercussions when bad actors are in place, and they need to be removed immediately. We also need to have policies in place that do not allow for law enforcement officers across the board who are dismissed from one department and in one state allowed to go and work somewhere else. We need a national registry of what has been done, because we are seeing prosecutions but no convictions. And anytime there's a prosecution and no conviction, that doesn't mean that the individual is not guilty. It just means that it was not able to be proved. But right now we have a videotape, but what if there was no video? So we have to really, I'm glad to see that they are going to have a civil rights investigation, but this after the fact cannot continue, because we are losing too many lives, too many families are disrupted, too many people are damaged, and right now our country is on fire.
It really is, and it's devastating, heartbreaking. I do want to ask you, because you're experienced in a lot of things. That's why I was so excited to speak with you today. But you are experienced in crisis management. So if the president called you and asked you how to handle these protests, and we should know the vast majority of protests are peaceful, and law enforcement
Right.
has said they have evidence of outside agitators coming in. But if he were to ask you how to handle the protests and some of the escalations that we've seen, what would be your advice?
The first thing I would tell him is for him to stop talking. Unfortunately, the President of the United States is a polarizing figure to people of color. So he would need to stop talking, and he would need to have leaders across the masses and across the country. African American leaders, those who are respected, those who actually do policy work and other crisis management work, to come in and begin to have conversations. We need conversations on the ground with those who are leading organized, peaceful protests so they can address what might not seem peaceful. Those who, we have to recognize that there are opportunists. But I would tell the president that this way is not the right way. We need to gather those voices. We need to come up with strategies. We need to define policies. We need to have an agenda. We need to lay it out. We need to let the people see it. We need to let the people engage in conversations. We need to let the people lead the work. We need to have them in every police department, in all communities. There needs to be boots on the ground. We need the funding for the work. We need the funding to address this issue. We need the leeway to have these conversations authentically, not guided and covered by a mask or shield of righteous indignation. We need a attorney general who has empathy and recognizes that everyone has to play their part, and right now they're not playing their part, and they should stand down.
Sunny Slaughter, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. I really appreciated hearing your perspective. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. A memorial continues to grow at the site of George Floyd's death in Minneapolis.